She knelt beside the screaming child while his billionaire father stood frozen in shame, and in that moment of tender mercy, everything David Sterling thought he knew about love crumbled to dust. If you love this story, imagine having a regular dose of heartwarming tales delivered right to you. By hitting that like button and subscribing, you'll ensure you never miss out on the inspiring and uplifting content we share every week. The 62nd floor of Sterling Tower pierced the Manhattan skyline like a glass spear, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of the city below. But David Sterling wasn't admiring the view. He was on his knees in his pristine penthouse office, trying to coax his 8-year-old son out from under the mahogany conference table. "Tyler, buddy, we need to go." David's voice carried the controlled tension of a man accustomed to moving mountains with a phone call, yet powerless against his own child's meltdown. The car's waiting downstairs. The little boy's hands were pressed firmly over his ears, his body rocking in the rhythmic pattern that David had learned meant sensory overload. The morning sun streaming through the windows was too bright. The hum of the building's ventilation system was too loud. Everything was too much. David's $1,000 suit wrinkled as he crouched lower, his Italian leather shoes squeaking against the marble floor. He'd rescheduled this merger meeting twice already. The Japanese investors were flying in specifically for this lunch. Millions of dollars hung in the balance. But his son was crying. "Tyler, please." David's voice cracked slightly. "Daddy needs you to be brave today, okay? Just for a few hours." The boy's sobs intensified, and David felt that familiar twist in his chest, the one that reminded him how spectacularly he was failing at the one job that mattered most. 3 years since Charlotte died, and he still felt like he was drowning in the aftermath of her absence. His phone buzzed. Another text from his assistant. "Investors arriving in 20 minutes. Need you at restaurant." David closed his eyes, took a breath, and did what he always did when the world demanded more than he could give. He found a way to make it work. "Come on, Tyler. We'll make it an adventure." Across town in Brooklyn, Amara Johnson was having her own battle with time and circumstances. She stood in her cramped apartment kitchen, simultaneously packing her daughter's lunch, reviewing flashcards for her evening college course, and mentally preparing for another double shift at Meridian, the kind of upscale Manhattan restaurant where the wine cost more than her monthly rent. "Mama, I can't find my science project," 7-year-old Zoe called from the bedroom they shared. "Check under the bed, baby girl," Amara called back, tucking a love note into Zoe's lunchbox alongside the peanut butter sandwich. The rent was due in 5 days, and she was still $40 short, but Zoe would have her lunch money and her school supplies. Always. Amara caught her reflection in the toaster's chrome surface, dark circles under her eyes, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, the pressed white blouse that would soon be covered by Meridian's elegant black apron. At 28, she looked older, worn down by the weight of single motherhood and deferred dreams. Her phone rang. Zoe's school. "Ms. Johnson? This is Principal Martinez. I wanted to remind you about the Spring Science Fair, which will take place next Friday evening. Zoe's been so excited about presenting her project on butterflies." Amara's heart sank. Friday was her biggest earning night at the restaurant. The tips from weekend prep could make the difference between paying the electric bill on time and getting another extension notice. Of course, she heard herself say. I wouldn't miss it. Another promise she'd have to figure out how to keep. "Found it, Mama." Zoe bounded into the kitchen, her gap-toothed grin lighting up the small space. She held up a shoebox decorated with cotton balls and plastic butterflies, her pride evident in every gesture. "It's beautiful, baby." Amara knelt to Zoe's level, straightening the paper wings of a monarch butterfly. "Tell me again how they transform." "They go into the chrysalis all ugly and broken," Zoe explained with 8-year-old authority, "but then they come out completely different, more beautiful than before." Amara kissed her daughter's forehead, tasting the sweet innocence of childhood, wishing she could bottle this moment before the day's demands swept it away. "Sometimes the most beautiful changes happen when we least expect them," she whispered. Neither Amara nor David could have imagined that in just a few hours, their carefully separate worlds would collide in a moment that would change everything they thought they knew about love, loss, and second chances. Hello, my beautiful family and friends. I'm so happy to have you here. If you're ready to be part of this special story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from you. And be sure to stay tuned, because tomorrow I'll be back with another story that's just as unforgettable, and you won't want to miss it. Alright, let's begin this journey together. The lunch rush at Meridian was in full swing when David Sterling walked through the mahogany doors, his hand protectively placed on Tyler's shoulder. The restaurant hummed with the orchestrated chaos of Manhattan's elite, crystal glasses clinking, silverware dancing against porcelain, and the low murmur of deals being struck over $50 entrees. Tyler's grip on his father's hand tightened immediately. The boy's sensory-sensitive ears picked up every sound, the espresso machine's violent hiss, the sharp percussion of high heels against marble, the overlapping conversations that crashed together like competing symphonies. "It's okay, buddy," David whispered, though his own jaw was clenched with anxiety. The Japanese investors were already seated at the corner table, their faces politely impassive as they watched David navigate his son through the maze of tables. Amara noticed them immediately, not because of David's commanding presence or his obvious wealth, but because of the little boy's distress. She developed a sixth sense for children in crisis, honed by years of watching Zoe navigate a world that wasn't always kind to sensitive souls. The boy's shoulders were hunched, his free hand pressed against his ear. His breathing was shallow, rapid. All the signs were there. David made it exactly 3 steps past the hostess station before Tyler stopped moving entirely. The restaurant's ambient lighting, designed to create intimate atmosphere, suddenly became stroking chaos in Tyler's overwhelmed nervous system. The gentle jazz playing overhead transformed into an assault. The scent of searing garlic and wine became suffocating. "No," Tyler whispered, then louder, "No, no, and no." Conversations began to quiet at nearby tables. David felt the familiar burn of public judgment, the weight of eyes that saw only a father who couldn't control his child. "Tyler, please," David's voice carried barely controlled desperation. "The nice men are waiting." But Tyler was already spiraling. His small body began the telltale rocking motion, his hands flying to cover his ears as a keening wail escaped his throat. Other diners were staring now, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed annoyance. David dropped to one knee, his face flushing as he tried to gather his son into his arms. "Sha, buddy, it's okay, we can." Too loud. Tyler's scream cut through the restaurant's refined atmosphere like a siren. Too bright. "Make it stop." From across the dining room, Amara watched David's face crumble. She recognized that expression, the helpless panic of a parent watching their child suffer, knowing that love alone wasn't enough to fix it. She shouldn't interfere. The maitre d' was already approaching with practiced efficiency, probably to escort them to a quieter area or suggest they leave entirely. These weren't her customers, and getting involved with guests beyond professional service was strictly forbidden. But Tyler's cries pulled at something deep in her chest, something that had nothing to do with workplace protocols and everything to do with a maternal instinct that had kept her own daughter safe through countless storms. Amara found she moving before conscious thought kicked in. She knelt on the marble floor beside the crying child, ignoring the expensive fabric of her uniform skirt against the cold stone. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely above a whisper, a technique she'd learned from Zoe's occupational therapist. "Hey there, little butterfly," she said softly, not touching, not demanding eye contact, and just creating a bubble of calm presence. "I see you. I see that everything feels too big right now." Tyler's screaming faltered slightly, some part of his overwrought system recognizing the gentle tone. David looked up at this woman who had materialized beside his son like an angel in server's attire. Her face was focused entirely on Tyler, her dark eyes filled with understanding rather than judgment. "The lights are too bright," she continued in that same soothing whisper, "and all these sounds are crashing together like thunder, aren't they?" Tyler's rocking slowed fractionally. He peeked at her through his fingers. Amara slowly, deliberately began to hum, not a melody that competed with the restaurant's noise, but something that seemed to absorb it, transform it into something manageable. Her hands moved in gentle rhythmic patterns in the air, giving Tyler's eyes something steady to focus on. "You know what I do when the world gets too loud?" she asked, her voice creating an island of peace in the chaos. "I imagine I'm a butterfly in a chrysalis. Everything outside is scary and overwhelming, but inside my cocoon, I'm safe. I'm growing. I'm getting ready to fly." Tyler's breathing began to slow. His hands gradually lowered from his ears. "Can you show me how butterflies breathe?" Amara asked, demonstrating with slow, exaggerated breaths. "In, like they smell the most beautiful flower, and out, like they're whispering secrets to the wind." Tyler attempted to mirror her breathing, his small chest rising and falling in shaky imitation. David watched in stunned silence as his son, who had never responded to any of his attempts at comfort, who flinched away from therapists and teachers alike, began to calm under this stranger's gentle guidance. "That's it," Amara encouraged. "You're doing so well. Now, can you tell me 3 things you can see that are soft colors? Not the bright ones, just the gentle ones." Tyler's voice was barely audible. Your shirt is soft white." "Yes, it is. What else?" The tablecloth over there is cream." "Beautiful. One more." Tyler looked around with new focus, his sensory system beginning to regulate. "Daddy's tie is soft blue." David looked down at his tie, Charlotte's last Father's Day gift to him, and felt something crack open in his chest. "Perfect," Amara smiled, and Tyler actually smiled back, the first genuine smile David had seen from his son in weeks. "You know what? I think you're ready to come out of your chrysalis now. Feel how much calmer everything is." Tyler nodded, and then did something that made David's breath catch. He reached out and touched Amara's hand. "Thank you," Tyler whispered. The restaurant around them had returned to its normal rhythm, but David felt as though the world had fundamentally shifted. This woman, this stranger, had reached his son in a way he'd never been able to. Amara stood gracefully, smoothing her skirt. "You're very brave," she told Tyler. "And you," she looked at David, "you're a good daddy. Sometimes the people we love just need us to be present with them in their storms." She turned to walk away, to return to her tables and her normal duties, but David's voice stopped her. "Wait." The word came out rougher than he intended. "Please." How did you do that? How did you know?" Amara paused, looking back at this powerful man who was staring at her like she held the secrets of the universe. "Every child is trying to tell us something," she said simply. "We just have to know how to listen." In that moment, as their eyes met across the impossible divide of their different worlds, something electric passed between them. Recognition, gratitude, and the first spark of something neither of them was ready to name. Tyler tugged on his father's hand, ready now to face the rest of the afternoon, but David found himself reluctant to break eye contact with the woman who had just shown him what real compassion looked like. "What's your name?" he asked. "Amara," she replied, the word carrying the music of her heritage. "Amara," David repeated, as if committing it to memory. "Thank you for seeing us." She nodded, and then walked away, leaving David standing in the middle of Meridian with his son's small hand in his and the sudden, overwhelming realization that he'd just witnessed something miraculous. Neither of them knew that this brief encounter would become the fault line along which both their carefully constructed lives would split open, revealing hearts that had been waiting, without knowing it, to be found. The merger meeting was a disaster. David sat across from the 3 Japanese investors, their faces a study in polite confusion as Tyler colored quietly in the corner booth where Amara had suggested they relocate. The boy was calm now, humming softly to himself, but David's mind was elsewhere entirely. "Mr. Sterling," Tanaka-san's crisp English cut through David's distraction. "Perhaps we should reschedule when you're able to give this transaction your full attention?" Heat flooded David's cheeks. He'd built Sterling Enterprises from a small tech startup into a billion-dollar empire through laser focus and ruthless attention to detail. He didn't get distracted. He didn't lose million-dollar deals because a waitress had shown kindness to his son. "My apologies," David straightened, forcing his corporate mask back into place. "As I was saying, the synergies between our companies." But even as he launched into his practiced pitch, his eyes kept drifting across the restaurant to where Amara moved between tables with fluid efficiency. She tied her apron slightly differently, he noticed, higher on her waist. Her smile for other customers was professional, warm but measured. Nothing like the gentle radiance she'd shown Tyler. "Stop it," he commanded himself. She was doing her job, nothing more. The investors exchanged glances. And stumble in presentation. "Dad," Tyler's small voice interrupted, "can the butterfly lady bring me more crayons?" The butterfly lady, of course Tyler would remember her that way. "She's working, buddy," David said quietly, then louder to the table. "Where were we?" "Ah yes, projected earnings." 3 tables away, Amara was having her own battle with focus. "The salmon special comes with seasonal vegetables and," she paused mid-sentence as her eyes inadvertently found David's table. He was gesturing animatedly to the men in expensive suits, but there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before their encounter. The customer's voice pulled her back. "The salmon." "Yes, sorry." It comes with roasted asparagus and our signature lemon butter sauce. Amara forced her professional smile back into place, but her hands trembled slightly as she wrote down the order. What is wrong with you? She scolded herself. He's a customer. A wealthy customer who lives in a completely different universe. But she couldn't shake the memory of his face when Tyler had reached for her hand. The raw vulnerability, the desperate gratitude of a parent who'd been drowning and hadn't even realized it until someone threw him a lifeline. Amara Marcus, the floor manager, appeared at her elbow. Table 12 is asking for their check. And whatever you did earlier with that kid, nice work, could have been a real scene. She nodded, grateful that her intervention had been seen as damage control rather than overstepping boundaries. But as she processed Table 12's payment, she found herself stealing another glance at the corner booth. Tyler was holding up a drawing, crude stick figures under a rainbow. Even from across the room, she could see his animated excitement as he showed it to his father. David's smile in response looked genuine, unguarded in a way that transformed his entire face. Don't, Amara warned herself. Don't read into it. Don't make it mean something it doesn't. She'd learned that lesson the hard way with Zoe's father, mistaking moments of connection for promises of forever, seeing depth where there was only surface charm. Rich men didn't fall for working-class single mothers. They might enjoy the novelty for a while, but they always returned to their own world eventually. Still, when Tyler waved at her from across the restaurant, her heart did a traitorous little skip. The investors left 20 minutes later without signing anything. David watched them go, his jaw tight with frustration. He'd salvaged what he could, arranged a follow-up meeting, but the damage was done. His reputation for unshakable focus had taken a hit. It's okay, Daddy, Tyler said, carefully packing his crayons back into their box. The butterfly lady said sometimes we just need to be present in the storm. The butterfly lady. Tyler had mentioned her 4 times during the meal, asking when she might visit their table again, wondering if she had children of her own, if she knew other songs about breathing. David pulled out his phone, intending to handle the crisis management this deal would require, but instead found him watching Amara clear a nearby table. She moved with economical grace, stacking plates with practiced efficiency while maintaining warm eye contact with departing customers. She glanced over and caught him looking. For a moment, their eyes held, and David felt that same electric jolt he'd experienced earlier. She looked away first, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. This is ridiculous, David thought. She's a waitress. You're being grateful, nothing more. But gratitude didn't explain why he found himself calculating how much longer her shift might last, or why he was suddenly reluctant to leave the restaurant. Tyler tugged on his sleeve. Daddy, can we ask the butterfly lady to come have dinner with us sometime? At our house? The innocence of the question hit David like a physical blow. How could he explain to his 8-year-old that people like them didn't socialize with people like her? That their worlds had intersected for exactly one moment of crisis, nothing more? She's very busy with her work, buddy, he said carefully. But she was nice to me. And she made the loud quiet. She made the loud quiet. If only Tyler knew how perfectly he'd captured it, not just the sensory overload, but the constant noise in David's own head, the relentless pressure and isolation that had been his constant companion since Charlotte's death. For 10 minutes, in the presence of a woman whose name he'd learned only moments ago, that noise had quieted too. David left a $100 tip on a $40 meal, not unusual for him, but somehow this felt different. Not like the casual largesse of wealth, but like an inadequate attempt to quantify something invaluable. As they prepared to leave, Tyler broke away from his father's hand and ran back to where Amara was wiping down a table. Thank you for helping me breathe like a butterfly, he said solemnly, then wrapped his small arms around her waist in an impulsive hug. Amara's professional composure cracked completely. She knelt to Tyler's level, returning the hug with gentle warmth. Thank you for being so brave, she whispered, and for showing me your beautiful drawing. David watched this exchange with tightness in his chest that felt dangerously close to longing. When Tyler returned to his side, chattering excitedly about butterflies and breathing and the nice lady with the soft voice, David found himself looking back one more time. Amara was watching them leave, her expression unreadable. When their eyes met again, she quickly busied herself with clearing another table. That evening, David sat in his home office, ostensibly reviewing quarterly reports but actually staring out at the city lights beyond his windows. Tyler was asleep, but not before asking 3 more times if they could invite the butterfly lady for dinner. This is what happens, David told himself, when you let your guard down, when you mistake professional kindness for something personal. He'd built his life on control, on clear boundaries between his public and private selves. Charlotte had been different. She belonged to his world, understood the demands and expectations that came with his position. Their love had made sense, had fit seamlessly into the life he'd constructed. This, whatever this was, made no sense at all. But as he finally headed to bed, David found himself wondering what Amara did when her shift ended. Did she have family waiting for her? Friends? Was she working her way through school, or was serving tables a career choice? Did she think about their encounter at all, or had it been just another moment in her workday, notable only because she prevented a scene in an upscale restaurant? He told himself it didn't matter. That tomorrow he'd return to his normal routine, his normal life, and the brief disruption of this afternoon would fade into insignificance. But as he passed Tyler's room and heard his son humming softly in his sleep, the same tune Amara had hummed to calm him, David knew he was lying to himself. Some disruptions, he was beginning to realize, left cracks that couldn't be easily sealed. Have you ever had a moment with a stranger that changed how you saw yourself? Share your experience in the comments below. 5 days later, David found himself back at Meridian, ostensibly for a business dinner with his legal team. The truth, which he wouldn't admit even to himself, was that Tyler had asked about the butterfly lady every single day, and David had run out of reasonable explanations for why they couldn't visit the restaurant again. Just for an hour, he told Tyler that afternoon, while Daddy meets with some lawyers. Tyler's face had lit up with the first genuine excitement David had seen since Charlotte's death. How could he deny his son that spark of joy, even if it meant venturing back into territory that had left him unsettled for days? The evening crowd at Meridian was different from the lunch rush, quieter, more intimate, and filled with couples sharing expensive wine and closing business deals over 7-course meals. David had requested a corner table, telling himself it was for privacy during his legal discussion, but his eyes automatically scanned the dining room for Amara. She wasn't there. The disappointment that shot through him was immediate and entirely disproportionate. Of course she wasn't working, it was Thursday evening, and she'd been there Tuesday afternoon. She probably had other jobs, other responsibilities, a life that had nothing to do with his momentary need to see her again. Mr. Sterling? His lead attorney, Harrison, was reviewing contracts. The liability clauses in Section 12 need your attention. David forced himself to focus on the documents spread across the white tablecloth, but Tyler was growing restless. The boy had been unusually compliant about coming to another business dinner, probably hoping to see Amara again. Now, faced with nothing but adult conversation and legal jargon, his patience was wearing thin. "Daddy," Tyler whispered, tugging on David's sleeve. "Where is she?" "She's not working tonight, buddy," David said quietly, trying to project calm while his own disappointment churned in his stomach. "Maybe another time." Tyler's face fell, and David felt the familiar stab of parental guilt. He'd built up his son's expectations based on his own inexplicable need to return to this place, this moment of connection that had haunted him for days. "Can we go home?" Tyler asked, his voice small. Before David could answer, a commotion erupted near the kitchen doors. Raised voices, the clatter of dishes, and then, unmistakably, Amara's voice, strained with barely controlled frustration. "I understand you're short-staffed, but I've already worked a double at the cafe this morning, and I have class at 9. "Look, Johnson," the manager's voice carried across the dining room, "Patricia called in sick, and we've got a full house. You want the hours or not?" David found himself standing before conscious thought kicked in, his body responding to the distress in Amara's voice. She appeared in the dining room archway, hurriedly tying an apron around her waist, her movements sharp with exhaustion and frustration. She looked different. Her hair was slightly mussed, her uniform wrinkled as if she'd thrown it on quickly. There were shadows under her eyes that spoke of too little sleep and too much responsibility. Tyler saw her at the same moment and let out a delighted squeal that carried across the restaurant. "Butterfly lady." Amara's head turned toward their table, and David watched her expression cycle through surprise, recognition, and something that might have been pleasure before settling into professional composure. She approached their table with measured steps, her smile warming genuinely when she looked at Tyler. "Well, hello there, little butterfly," she said, her voice carrying that same gentle quality that had calmed Tyler's meltdown days earlier. "How are you tonight?" "I missed you," Tyler announced with 8-year-old honesty. "Daddy brought me here to see you, but you weren't here, and I was sad, but now you are here, and I'm happy again." David felt heat creep up his neck at his son's artless confession. Amara's eyes flicked to his face, and he saw a flash of something: surprise? Understanding before she looked away. "Well, I'm very happy to see you too," she told Tyler. "Have you been practicing your butterfly breathing?" "Every day. Daddy learned it too, didn't you, Daddy?" David cleared his throat, acutely aware of his lawyers watching this exchange with poorly concealed curiosity. "Tyler's been enthusiastic about the techniques you showed him." "That's wonderful." Amara's smile included David this time, and he felt that familiar electric jolt. Breathing exercises can help with all kinds of overwhelming situations. Their eyes held for a moment longer than strictly professional, and David found himself thinking that she looked like she could use some calming techniques herself. The tension around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she arranged her notepad, she was running on empty. "Are you okay?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Amara's professional mask faltered slightly. "I'm fine, just a long day. Can I get you gentlemen started with drinks?" But as she spoke, Tyler launched into an animated retelling of how he'd used butterfly breathing when his teacher had raised her voice in class, complete with dramatic reenactments. Amara found herself drawn into the story, laughing at Tyler's impressions and asking genuine questions about his week. David watched this interaction with growing fascination. His son, who barely spoke to therapists, who shrank away from most adults, was chattering away like Amara was his favorite aunt. And she wasn't just being polite, she was genuinely engaged, asking follow-up questions that showed she remembered details from their previous encounter. "And then the loud bell rang for recess," Tyler continued, "but I remembered what you said about chrysalis time, so I went to the quiet corner and did the breathing, and then I felt better." "That's incredible," Amara said, and David could hear the genuine pride in her voice. "You're getting so good at taking care of yourself." Harrison cleared his throat meaningfully, and David realized they'd been monopolizing Amara's time while his legal team waited patiently. But as she prepared to take their drink orders, Tyler grabbed her hand. "Can you sit with us? Just for a little bit. Daddies have boring work stuff, but you're much more interesting." "Tyler," David started to intervene, but Amara was already responding. "I wish I could, sweetie, but I have other tables to take care of. Maybe I can check on you later." Tyler's face fell, and David found himself making a decision that would have seemed impossible a week ago. "Actually," he said to his lawyers, "why don't we reschedule this meeting? Tyler's had a long day, and I think we all need some time to review these contracts more thoroughly." Harrison looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, tomorrow morning works for me." As the lawyers gathered their papers and left, David realized he'd just blown off $1 million negotiation to spend time with a woman whose last name he didn't even know. And he didn't regret it for a second. "You didn't have to do that," Amara said quietly, glancing around the restaurant. The evening rush was picking up, and she could see other tables trying to catch her attention. "Yes, I did," David replied, and the honesty in his voice surprised them both. Tyler was right, "You're much more interesting than contract negotiations." Amara felt her cheeks warm. This was dangerous territory: personal comments, extended conversations with customers, especially customers who looked at her like she was solving puzzles they didn't know they had. "I should really," she gestured toward her other tables. "Of course, but..." David hesitated, and then pressed forward. "You look exhausted. When was the last time you ate something?" The question was so unexpected, so personal, that Amara's defenses cracked completely. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. Tyler giggled. "Your tummy is talking." Despite herself, Amara laughed, a real laugh, not the professional chuckle she used with difficult customers. "I guess it is. I had a granola bar around noon." "That's not enough," David said, his voice carrying an authority that suggested he was accustomed to solving problems. "When do you get a break?" "I don't, really. Short-staffed tonight, remember." David looked around the restaurant, noting the other servers rushing between tables, the harried look of the hostess juggling reservations. An idea formed, reckless, probably inappropriate, but he found him not caring. "What if I made it possible for you to take a break?" he asked. Amara's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I talked to your manager, made it clear that keeping you happy was important to me as a customer? What if I suggested that taking care of your best servers was good business?" The offer hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to examine. Amara felt a familiar wariness, rich men who wanted to help, who saw her struggles as problems to be solved with money or influence. But Tyler was looking at her with such hopeful eyes, and David's expression held none of the condescending paternalism she'd learned to recognize. There was something almost vulnerable in his face, as if her answer mattered more than business logic dictated. "Why?" she asked simply. David looked at his son, who was humming softly while coloring on his napkin, then back at Amara. "Because," he said quietly, "you gave my son something I couldn't. And I think maybe you need someone to do the same for you." The honesty in his voice, the recognition that she was struggling and the offer of help without expectation, it undid something in Amara's chest that she'd kept carefully locked for years. Before she could second-guess herself, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." 20 minutes later, Amara found herself in the unprecedented position of sitting at a customer's table during her shift, a plate of the restaurant's signature pasta in front of her and Tyler chattering happily as he shared his breadsticks. David had made good on his promise with surgical efficiency. A quiet word with the manager, accompanied by what Amara suspected was a significant monetary gesture, had resulted in her being assigned exclusively to their table for the remainder of the evening. The other servers would cover her section. "I can't believe you actually did that," she said, twirling linguine around her fork with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion. "You needed to eat," David replied simply, watching her take her first real bite of food in 12 hours. "When did you last have a proper meal?" The question was casual, but Amara heard the genuine concern underneath. She wasn't used to people noticing her needs, much less acting on them. "Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe the day before," she paused, realizing how that sounded. "I'm not usually this scattered. It's just been a rough week." Tyler looked up from his coloring. "Are you sad, butterfly lady?" The child's directness, delivered without judgment or adult complications, made Amara's throat tighten unexpectedly. "A little bit, sweetie. Sometimes grown-ups have worries, just like kids do." "What kind of worries?" Tyler asked, and then looked at his father. "Daddy has worries too. He gets lines right here when he thinks I'm not looking." Tyler pointed to the space between David's eyebrows. David's hand went unconsciously to his forehead, and Amara saw him recognize the gesture Tyler was describing. The moment of vulnerability, a powerful man seeing himself through his child's observant eyes, shifted something in the atmosphere between them. "Tyler's very perceptive," David said quietly. "Most children are," Amara replied. "They see what we think we're hiding." She took another bite, her body finally relaxing as proper nutrition hit her system. The warmth of the food, the comfort of sitting still for the first time in days, the unexpected kindness of this strange situation, it all combined to lower her usual defenses. "Can I ask you something?" David's voice was careful, respectful. "Earlier, when you helped Tyler, you knew exactly what to do. That wasn't just intuition." Amara set down her fork, meeting his eyes. "My daughter has sensory processing challenges. Similar to Tyler's, but different manifestations. I've learned a lot of techniques over the years." "You have a daughter?" Tyler perked up immediately. "How old is she? What's her name? Does she like butterflies too?" Despite everything, Amara smiled at his enthusiasm. "Her name is Zoe, and she's 7. And yes, she loves butterflies. She's actually doing a science project about them right now." "That's so cool. Can I meet her?" The innocent question hung in the air, highlighting the impossible distance between their worlds. Amara felt reality creep back in, the reminder that this was temporary, that she was still a waitress sharing a meal with a customer whose net worth probably exceeded her lifetime earnings. "Maybe someday," she said gently, the same way she'd learned to deflect Zoe's requests for things they couldn't afford. But David was studying her face with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "Where is she tonight?" he asked. "With my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. She watches Zoe when I have to work late shifts." Amara glanced at her phone. "I was supposed to pick her up by 10, but with this extra shift." "Call her," David said immediately. "Let her know you'll be late. I'll make sure you're compensated for any inconvenience." "You can't just solve everything with money," Amara said, more sharply than she intended. The words created a sudden tension. David's expression closed off slightly, and Amara realized she'd hit a nerve. I'm sorry, she said quickly. That came out wrong. I just meant. No, you're right. David's voice was quiet, thoughtful. I do try to solve everything with money. It's what I know how to do. Tyler, sensing the shift in mood, moved closer to his father. Daddy's really good at fixing things, he said loyally. He fixed my room when the loud heater was bothering me, and he fixed my school when the lights were too bright. How did he fix your school? Amara asked, genuinely curious. Tyler launched into an animated explanation of how David had donated new lighting systems to Tyler's classroom and sensory-friendly furniture to create quiet spaces. As she listened, Amara began to understand something about the man sitting across from her. You advocate for him, she said when Tyler finished his story. I try, David replied, but there was something hollow in his voice. Though apparently, not very successfully based on Tuesday's meltdown. The vulnerability in his admission caught Amara off guard. Here was one of the most powerful men in the city, admitting failure in the one arena that mattered most to him. That wasn't failure, she said firmly. That was a bad moment. There's a difference. David looked up, something hopeful flickering in his eyes. You think so? I know so. You want to know how I know? He nodded. Because when Tyler was overwhelmed, you stayed with him. You didn't walk away, you didn't get angry, and you didn't make it about your embarrassment. You knelt on the floor in your expensive suit and tried to help, even when you didn't know how. That's not failure, that's love. The words hung between them, more intimate than anything they'd shared so far. David felt something crack open in his chest, a space that had been sealed since Charlotte's funeral. His mother would have known what to do, he said quietly. Tyler looked up from his coloring. Mama used to sing the butterfly song too, he said matter-of-factly. But she went to heaven, and now she can't sing anymore. The simplicity of Tyler's explanation hit both adults like a physical blow. Amara felt tears prick her eyes, understanding flooding through her. I'm sorry, she whispered to David. I didn't know. Cancer, David said, the word still bitter on his tongue after 3 years. She fought for 2 years, but Tyler was only 5 when she died. He barely remembers her now, except in fragments like that. Amara reached across the table without thinking, covering David's hand with hers. The contact was electric, warm, and entirely inappropriate for a waitress comforting a customer. But David didn't pull away. He remembers the important things, she said softly. The love, the songs, the feeling of being safe, that's what matters. Does he though? David's voice cracked slightly. Because most of the time, I feel like I'm failing him completely. Like I'm a poor substitute for what he really needs. You're not a substitute, Amara said fiercely. You're his father. There's no replacement for that. Tyler had been listening to this exchange with the solemn attention children gave to adult conversations they only partially understood. Daddy, he said suddenly, are you sad because Mama can't help me with the loud anymore? David's composure finally cracked completely. He pulled Tyler into his lap, burying his face in his son's hair to hide the tears that threatened. Yeah, buddy, he whispered. Sometimes Daddy gets sad about that. It's okay, Tyler said with 8-year-old wisdom. The butterfly lady is helping now. Maybe Mama sent her. The innocent observation hit Amara like lightning. She thought about the timing of Tuesday's events, how she'd been called in early for a shift she didn't want, how she'd been assigned to that section of the restaurant, how every instinct had urged her to intervene when Tyler was struggling. Maybe she did, Amara said softly, and when David looked up at her, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. What about Zoe's father? David asked gently. Does he help with her challenges? Amara's expression hardened slightly. Zoe's father decided that having a daughter with special needs wasn't part of his life plan. He left when she was 2. The parallel wasn't lost on either of them. 2 parents, abandoned by their partners in different ways, struggling to navigate their children's needs alone. I'm sorry, David said, and she heard genuine empathy in his voice. It's okay. We're better off without him. Zoe and I, we're a team. Amara's voice carried fierce pride. I may not be able to buy her new lighting systems or sensory furniture, but I show up. Every day I show up. That's the most important thing, David said, and for the first time since Charlotte's death, he felt like someone truly understood the weight of single parenthood. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, their hands still joined across the table, Tyler humming contentedly in his father's lap. Around them, the restaurant continued its evening rhythm, but their corner felt like a bubble outside of time. I should probably. Amara started to pull her hand away, reality intruding again. Not yet, David said quietly, his fingers tightening around hers. Please. Just, not yet. And so they stayed, two wounded souls recognizing something precious in each other, while Tyler colored butterflies on napkins and hummed the songs his mother used to sing. What do you think heals us more, time or connection? Share your thoughts in the comments below. By 9 o'clock, Meridian had settled into its evening rhythm. The dinner rush was winding down, leaving pockets of intimate conversation and the gentle clink of wine glasses. In their corner booth, an unlikely family had formed around shared stories and growing trust. Tyler had fallen asleep against his father's chest, his small hand still clutching a crayon, his breathing deep and peaceful. David's suit jacket was draped over his son like a blanket, and he made no move to disturb the boy's rest. He looks so peaceful, Amara whispered, her voice soft with tenderness. He hasn't slept this well in public since. David paused, the memory catching in his throat. Since before Charlotte got sick, she used to say he could sleep anywhere as long as he felt safe. He feels safe with you, Amara said simply. Look at how he's holding on to you, even in his sleep. David glanced down at his son's relaxed face, seeing it as if for the first time. The tension that usually marked Tyler's features, the hypervigilance, the subtle anxiety, was completely absent. I never noticed, he admitted. I was always so focused on what I was doing wrong, I missed what I might be doing right. Amara smiled, reaching across to gently smooth Tyler's hair. The gesture was so natural, so maternal, that David felt his breath catch. That's the thing about loving someone, she said. We see our failures in high definition, but our successes are invisible to us. Is that what you do with Zoe? Every day Amara's laugh was soft, self-deprecating. I worry I'm not doing enough, not giving her enough, not being enough. But then she'll do something like make me a card that says best mama in the universe, and I realize she doesn't see my failures at all. What does she see? Amara considered the question, her fingers still gently stroking Tyler's hair. Love, I think. Presence, the fact that I never give up on her, even when things get hard. That's exactly what Tyler sees in you, David said quietly. What he saw from the moment you knelt beside him. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted between them, a recognition that went deeper than gratitude or attraction. They were seeing each other clearly for the first time, not as customer and server, not as rich man and working woman, but as two people doing their best to love their children in an overwhelming world. Can I ask you something? Amara's voice was hesitant. Anything. Why didn't you just hire more specialists after Charlotte died? Nannies who understood Tyler's needs, therapists who could teach you what to do. David was quiet for a long moment, considering how to explain something he'd never articulated, even to himself. Because, he said finally, I was afraid if I let other people handle the hard parts, Tyler would figure out that they were better at being his parent than I was. And then I'd lose him too. The honesty was devastating in its simplicity. Amara felt tears prick her eyes at the image of this powerful man, terrified of being found inadequate by his own child. You can't lose him, she said fiercely. He's yours. Not because you're perfect, but because you love him enough to keep trying. How do you know that? Because that's what Zoe taught me. Amara leaned forward, her voice passionate. When she was first diagnosed, I spent months researching every therapy, every intervention, and every specialist in the city. I was drowning in information and still felt like I was failing her. What changed? She did. Amara's smile was radiant with the memory. One day, I was having a breakdown because I couldn't afford this specialized program everyone said she needed. I was crying in the kitchen, thinking I was the worst mother in the world. And she came up to me, put her little hands on my face, and said, Mama, I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be mine. David felt something tight in his chest loosen. She said that at 7? She was 5 then. But children see truth more clearly than we do. Tyler doesn't need you to be a specialist or a therapist or even to know all the answers. He needs you to be his daddy. As if summoned by their conversation, Tyler stirred against David's chest, blinking sleepily up at his father. "Are we still at the butterfly place?" he murmured. "We are, buddy," David said softly. "Did you have a good nap?" Tyler nodded, then looked across at Amara with the serious expression children wore when making important announcements. "I dreamed about Mama," he said. "She was in a garden with lots of butterflies, and she was smiling. She said she was happy that you found the butterfly lady." The adults exchanged a look over Tyler's head, both feeling something profound in the child's simple words. "That sounds like a beautiful dream," Amara said gently. It was. Tyler sat up straighter, suddenly animated. "Can I tell you a secret?" "Of course." Tyler leaned closer to Amara, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that David could still hear. "I think you make Daddy's eyes less sad," he said seriously. "They get crinkly when he smiles now, like they used to with Mama." Amara's breath caught. She looked at David and saw that Tyler was right. There was something lighter in his expression, warmth that hadn't been there when they'd first met. "Tyler," David started, embarrassed by his son's observation. "It's okay, Daddy," Tyler said matter-of-factly. "Mama would want your eyes to be happy again. She told me in the dream." The child's certainty, delivered without drama or expectation, settled over them like a blessing. David felt years of guilt and self-imposed isolation begin to crack, making space for something he'd thought he'd lost forever, the possibility of joy. "Your mama sounds like she was very wise," Amara said to Tyler, but her eyes were on David. "She was," David replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have loved you." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that went far beyond their brief acquaintance. Amara felt her heart skip, recognizing the shift from gratitude to something infinitely more dangerous. "David," she started, but he interrupted her gently. "I know this is crazy," he said. "I know we barely know each other, that our lives don't make sense together. But Tyler's right, you do make something in me less sad. For the first time in 3 years, I can imagine being happy again." Amara felt tears threaten. "This is happening so fast." "I know. And if you tell me to slow down, if you tell me this is too much, I'll understand. But I can't pretend that what I feel is just gratitude anymore." Tyler, who had been listening to this exchange with the fascination children had for adult emotions they didn't fully understand, suddenly clapped his hands together. "Does this mean the butterfly lady can come have dinner at our house now?" he asked excitedly. Both adults laughed, the child's practical question cutting through the intensity of the moment. "Would you like that?" David asked Amara, his voice carefully neutral, giving her space to refuse. Amara thought about all the reasons she should say no. The difference in their worlds, the complications it would create, the risk of letting herself hope for something that seemed too good to be true. Then she looked at Tyler's eager face, at David's carefully hopeful expression, and realized that some chances only came once. "I'd like that very much," she said quietly. "But there's something you should know first." "What's that?" Amara took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I'm not just a waitress. I mean, I am right now, but I'm finishing my master's degree in special education. I work here and at the cafe to pay for school and to support Zoe, but this isn't all I am." The vulnerability in her confession, the fear that he might see her differently, judge her for her circumstances, made David's heart ache. "I know that," he said softly. "I knew that from the moment you helped Tyler. You have a gift with children, a knowledge that goes way beyond intuition. I should have realized you were in school." "You're not disappointed?" "That I'm not what I seem." David reached across the table, taking both her hands in his. "Amara," he said, his voice full of wonder, "you're so much more than you seem. And that's saying something, because what you seemed was already extraordinary." Tyler, who had been following this conversation with the intensity of someone watching his favorite movie, suddenly scrambled out of his father's lap and around to Amara's side of the booth. "Can I hug you?" he asked solemnly. "Not because I'm sad this time, but because I'm happy?" Amara's composure finally cracked completely. She gathered Tyler into her arms, holding him close as tears of joy and terror and possibility streamed down her face. "Of course you can, sweet boy," she whispered. "Anytime you want." Over Tyler's head, she met David's eyes and saw her own wonder reflected there. Neither of them had been looking for this, for love, for family, for the possibility of healing. But sometimes the most profound gifts came disguised as ordinary moments in busy restaurants, delivered by the voices of children who saw possibilities that adults were too afraid to imagine. "So," Tyler said, pulling back to look at both of them with satisfaction, "when can Zoe come play at our house too?" And for the first time since Charlotte's death, David Sterling found himself planning a future that included laughter, chaos, and the beautiful complexity of a blended family. The Sterling Foundation boardroom occupied the entire 45th floor of Sterling Tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Manhattan that had intimidated competitors and inspired confidence for over a decade. But on this gray Thursday morning, David felt neither commanding nor confident as he faced the 12 members of his board of directors. "Let me understand this correctly," Margaret Whitmore's voice cut through the boardroom's tension like a blade. As the Foundation's longest-serving member and Charlotte's former mentor, her opinion carried significant weight. "You're suggesting we restructure our entire special needs education initiative based on the recommendations of a waitress?" The word dripped with disdain, and David felt his jaw tighten. "Her name is Amara Johnson," he said evenly, "and she's completing her master's degree in special education at Columbia. Her insights into sensory-friendly learning environments could revolutionize how we approach classroom design." David, Harold Brennan, the Foundation's chief financial officer, leaned forward with a patronizing smile David had learned to despise. "We understand you're grateful to this woman for helping Tyler, but surely you can see how this appears to the rest of us?" "How does it appear, Harold?" "Like you're making decisions with your heart instead of your head," Margaret interjected. "We've heard the rumors, David. About you spend time with this woman, about Tyler becoming attached." The way she said attached made it sound like a disease. "Tyler has made remarkable progress," David said, fighting to keep his voice level. "His teachers have noticed improvements in his social interactions, his ability to self-regulate." "Because you hired additional specialists," Margaret interrupted. "Not because of some waitress playing amateur therapist." David stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "Enough." The single word carried enough authority to silence the room, but David could see the concerned glances exchanged between board members. He was losing them, and they all knew it. "I'm going to say this once," David continued, his voice dangerously quiet. "Amara Johnson is not some random waitress. She's an educated professional who happens to work in food service to support herself and her daughter while completing her degree. Her thesis research on trauma-informed educational practices for neurodiverse children is groundbreaking. And yes, she's become important to Tyler and to me. If that's a problem for any of you, you're welcome to submit your resignation." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret was the first to break it. "David, we're concerned about you. About your judgment. This woman has been in your life for what, 2 weeks? And you're already talking about restructuring million-dollar programs based on her suggestions." 3 weeks, David corrected, then immediately regretted revealing how precisely he was counting. "This is exactly what we're talking about," Harold said, his voice gentler now, as if he were addressing a troubled child. "You're not thinking clearly. Charlotte's been gone for 3 years, and we all understand that you've been lonely." "Don't." The word came out like a whip crack. "Don't you dare bring Charlotte into this." But Margaret pressed on, her voice taking on the tone she'd used when Charlotte was sick, when she'd helped make the hardest decisions. "Charlotte would want you to be happy, David. But she'd also want you to be smart. This woman, she's not from our world. She doesn't understand the pressures, the responsibilities, the expectations that come with your position." "What exactly are you suggesting?" Margaret exchanged glances with Harold before continuing. "We think you should take some time. Step back from the Foundation for a few weeks, get some perspective. Let us handle the day-to-day operations while you sort things out." The words hit David like a physical blow. They were trying to sideline him from his own foundation, the organization he'd built in Charlotte's memory. "And if I refuse? Then we'll be forced to call an emergency vote," Margaret said sadly. "For the good of the Foundation, and for Tyler's sake." The implicit threat was clear. They would remove him from leadership of his own organization if he didn't comply. David looked around the table at faces he'd known for years, people he'd considered friends and allies. He saw pity in some eyes, calculation in others, but not a single expression of support. "I see," he said quietly. "And what about the Special Needs Initiative? The programs that could help thousands of children like Tyler?" "We'll proceed with our original plans," Harold said. The ones developed by actual professionals, not restaurant workers with opinions. The dismissive contempt in his voice was the final straw. "Get out," David said. "David," Margaret started. "All of you. Get out of my building now." Underscore 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 underscore. 20 miles away in Brooklyn, Amara was having her own devastating confrontation. She stood in the cramped office of Meridian's general manager, Rick Morrison, her hands trembling as she stared at the photographs scattered across his desk. Images of her sitting at David's table, holding Tyler's hand, laughing at something the boy had said. Pictures taken from angles that suggested deliberate surveillance. "Where did you get these?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Anonymous tip," Rick said, his voice devoid of its usual jovial tone. "Someone wanted to make sure we knew about your extracurricular activities. I was doing my job. You told me to keep the customer happy. Your job doesn't include socializing with billionaires, Amara. It doesn't include sitting at their tables like you're their girlfriend instead of their server." The word girlfriend hung in the air like an accusation. Amara felt heat flood her cheeks. "He paid for my time. You know that. You approved it. I approved you taking care of a difficult customer situation. I didn't approve you conducting some kind of personal relationship on company time." Rick leaned back in his chair, his expression a mixture of disappointment and calculation. "Look, Amara, you're a good worker, one of our best. But this crosses a line. We have policies about fraternizing with customers, especially customers at Sterling's level. Policies you've never mentioned before. Because they've never been relevant before, most of our servers don't attempt to climb the social ladder by latching onto wealthy patrons." The accusation hit like a slap. "That's not what this is. Isn't it?" Rick pulled out his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be social media posts. "Because according to the Society blog photos, you've been seen entering Sterling Tower. You've been photographed at high-end restaurants. And word is, you've been spending time at his penthouse." Amara's stomach dropped. She thought about the afternoon Tyler had insisted on showing her his room, the evening David had ordered dinner delivered so they could eat together while helping both children with homework. Private moments that had somehow become public ammunition. Those were, "We were helping our children with their friendship. Tyler and Zoe have been playing together." Right. And I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that he's worth $3 billion. The cynicism in Rick's voice made Amara feel sick. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Rick leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Here's what I know. You're a single mother working 2 jobs to make ends meet. You're drowning in student debt. And suddenly, you're dating the richest man in the city. If you can't see how that looks. It's not about money. It's always about money, Amara, especially for people like us." The phrase "people like us" stung more than Amara expected. The implication that she should know her place, should understand the boundaries that separated her world from David's. "I'm not discussing my personal life with you," she said, trying to maintain some dignity. "You don't have to. I'm terminating your employment, effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. "You can't do that. I haven't done anything wrong. You violated company policy regarding customer relationships. More importantly, you've become a liability. We can't have servers who make headlines for all the wrong reasons." Rick slid a final severance check across the desk. 2 weeks' pay, barely enough to cover half her rent. "I need this job," Amara said, hating the desperation in her voice. "You should have thought about that before you started playing house with David Sterling." Underscore 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 underscore. That evening, David arrived at Amara's apartment building with Tyler in tow, both of them carrying flowers and excited energy. Tyler had spent the entire car ride planning activities for his playdate with Zoe, chattering about the new books he wanted to share and the drawings he'd made especially for her. David climbed the narrow stairs to Amara's third-floor apartment, his heart lighter than it had been in years despite the day's boardroom disaster. He'd deal with the foundation tomorrow. Tonight was about the family they were building together, the future they were creating one careful step at a time. He knocked on the door, Tyler bouncing beside him with anticipation. "Amara, it's us." The door opened to reveal Amara's neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, her usually kind face creased with worry. "Mr. Sterling?" "Amara, she had to go to the school. There was some kind of emergency with Zoe." David felt his stomach drop. What kind of emergency? Is she hurt? No, nothing like that, but some children, they were saying mean things. About the pictures in the newspaper, about Amara and you. Zoe, she got very upset and... Mrs. Rodriguez didn't need to finish. David could imagine the scenario, Zoe defending her mother against accusations she was too young to understand, becoming overwhelmed by the social conflict, probably having a meltdown that triggered her sensory sensitivities. "Which school?" David asked, already pulling out his phone to call his driver. But Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head. "She said to tell you not to come. She said it would make things worse." The words hit David like a punch to the gut. Tyler, who had been listening with growing confusion, tugged on his father's jacket. "Daddy, why can't we see Zoe and the butterfly lady?" David knelt to Tyler's level, his heart breaking at the disappointment in his son's eyes. How could he explain that their happiness had become a weapon used against the people they loved? "Sometimes, buddy," he said carefully, "grown-ups make things complicated. Amara and Zoe are dealing with some difficult people right now." "Because of us?" Tyler's voice was small, worried. David's silence was answer enough. Tyler's face crumpled. "I don't want the butterfly lady to be sad because of me." "It's not because of you," David said fiercely, pulling Tyler into his arms. "It's because some people don't understand how love works." But even as he said the words, David felt the weight of Margaret's warnings, Harold's implications, and Rick Morrison's accusations. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was being selfish, dragging Amara and Zoe into a world that would never accept them, exposing them to scrutiny and judgment they didn't deserve. Maybe love wasn't enough after all. When his phone rang an hour later and Amara's name appeared on the screen, David almost didn't answer. When he finally did, her voice was hollow, exhausted. "We need to talk," she said. "Amara, whatever happened today?" "Not over the phone tomorrow night, after Tyler's asleep. There are things I need to say." The line went dead, leaving David staring at his phone and feeling like his world was crumbling for the second time in his life. In the silence of his penthouse, with Tyler finally asleep after asking 6 more times when they could see Zoe again, David poured himself 3 fingers of scotch and stared out at the city lights. Maybe some fairy tales were too good to be true. Maybe he'd been a fool to think he could have it all. The next evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. David had spent the day in his home office, ostensibly working but actually staring at his phone every few minutes, dreading Amara's call. Tyler had asked about Zoe and the butterfly lady 17 times, each inquiry a fresh stab of guilt that reminded David of the collateral damage his feelings had caused. When the call finally came at 8:30, David's hands were trembling as he answered. "Hello." "Hi." Amara's voice was carefully controlled, professionally distant in a way that made David's chest tighten. "Is Tyler asleep?" "Just went down." How are you?" A bitter laugh. "I've been better. Can you meet me at Riverside Park?" The bench by the playground where we took the kids last week. The location choice felt deliberate, a place where they'd been happy, where Tyler and Zoe had played while their parents watched with growing hope. Now it would be the site of whatever conversation Amara needed to have that she couldn't say over the phone. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Amara was already waiting when David arrived, her figure silhouetted against the park's ambient lighting. She'd changed out of her usual work clothes into jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. Even in the dim light, David could see the exhaustion in her posture. "Thank you for coming," she said as he approached, her voice still carrying the careful politeness that felt like a wall between them. David sat beside her on the bench, close enough to catch the familiar scent of her shampoo but far enough to respect the distance she seemed to need. "Amara, about yesterday, whatever happened at the restaurant, with the foundation, we can figure this out." "We can." "I lost my job," she said simply, cutting off his stream of solutions. The words hit David like a physical blow. What? Rick Morrison fired me. Said I violated company policy by fraternizing with customers. There were photographs, David. Someone was watching us, documenting our, whatever this is. David felt rage build in his chest. That's illegal wrongful termination. I can have my lawyers. No. The word came out sharp, final. No lawyers, no fixing, no making this go away with money or influence. But you need that job. You have school, Zoe. I know what I need, Amara said, finally turning to look at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, but determined. What I need is for you to listen to me. Really listen, without trying to solve it. David forced himself to sit back, to swallow the dozen solutions already forming in his mind. Zoe came home from school yesterday in tears, Amara continued, her voice steady but strained. Some kids had seen pictures of us online, gossip blog photos of me going into your building. They said I was a gold digger. They said I was using you for money. Kids that age don't even know what that means. Their parents do. And children repeat what they hear at home. Amara's voice cracked slightly. 7-year-olds called my daughter's mother a whore, David. The word hung between them like a curse. David felt sick. My God, Amara, I'm so sorry. I never wanted. I know you never wanted this to happen. But it did happen. And it's going to keep happening, because that's what this world does to people like me who dare to reach above their station. People like you? David's voice sharpened. What's that supposed to mean? You know exactly what it means. Amara stood up, beginning to pace in front of the bench. I'm a black single mother who works in food service. You're a billionaire widower who runs in society circles. The narrative writes itself. That's not who you are to me. But it's who I am to everyone else. To your board of directors, to my former boss, to the parents at Zoe's school. She stopped pacing, facing him directly. Did you know they're considering removing her from the advanced program? They think having a mother involved in scandal might reflect poorly on the school's reputation. David shot to his feet. They can't do that. Her academic performance has nothing to do with what? Her mother dating above her class. With the shameful audacity of a waitress thinking she deserves a fairy tale ending. The bitterness in Amara's voice was like acid. David reached for her, but she stepped back. Don't you see? She continued. This isn't just about us anymore. Our children are paying the price for our selfishness. Selfishness. David's voice rose. Falling in love is selfish. Yes. The word exploded out of her. Yes, when it hurts the people we're supposed to protect most. When Tyler asks why he can't see Zoe anymore, when Zoe cries because kids at school are saying terrible things about her mother, how is that not selfish? They stared at each other across the growing chasm of their different realities, both breathing hard from the emotional explosion. So what are you saying? David asked quietly. Amara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking fragile in the park's dim lighting. I'm saying maybe everyone was right. Maybe this was always impossible. Maybe I was fooling myself thinking I could fit into your world without destroying everything good in my own. You're not destroying anything. I lost my job, David. Zoe is being bullied at school. Mrs. Rodriguez warned me that some of the other neighbors are gossiping, saying I'm getting ideas above my station. Even my college advisor suggested I might want to reconsider my associations if I want to be taken seriously in my field. Each revelation was like a knife to David's chest. I can fix this, all of it. New job, different school for Zoe, I can. Stop, Amara's voice was barely above a whisper. Just stop. Don't you see? Every solution you offer just proves their point. That I need you to rescue me, to lift me up to your level, that I can't survive in your world without your money, your influence, your protection. That's not true. Isn't it? She looked at him with eyes full of pain. Name one thing about this relationship that isn't built on you having the power to fix my problems. David opened his mouth to argue, and then closed it as the truth of her words hit home. Every gesture of care, every act of love, it all came from his position of privilege, his ability to smooth the path for her and Tyler and Zoe. "That doesn't make what we feel less real," he said desperately. "No," Amara agreed, tears finally spilling over. "But it makes it unsustainable." They stood in silence, the weight of impossible circumstances crushing the hope they'd built together. "I love you," David said suddenly, the words torn from his chest. "I love you, and I love Zoe, and Tyler adores you both. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Amara whispered. "And that's why this is so hard." "Then don't do this. Don't give up on us." Amara closed her eyes, her whole body shaking with the effort of what she had to say next. "I have to think about Zoe. About her future, her opportunities, her sense of self-worth. I can't let her grow up thinking she needs a man to rescue her, that her value comes from who she's connected to rather than who she is. You wouldn't be teaching her that. I would be living it." Amara opened her eyes, meeting his gaze directly. "Every day I stay with you, every problem you solve for me, every door your money opens, I'm showing her that love means dependency. That being saved is more important than being strong." David felt something crumble inside his chest. "And Tyler, what about what Tyler needs?" "Tyler needs his father to be whole and present, not chasing a relationship that's causing chaos in both your lives." "You make me whole," David said desperately. "You and Zoe, you make us a family." "We were never a family, David." The words came out like shards of glass. "We were a beautiful fantasy that couldn't survive contact with reality." The finality in her voice told David that her decision was made. But he couldn't let go without one last attempt. "What if we took a break? Just temporarily, let things die down." "No." Amara's voice was firm. "Because in 6 months or a year, the same problems will still exist, the same barriers, the same judgment, the same impossible distance between our worlds." She walked closer to him, close enough that he could see the tears on her cheeks, close enough to touch if he dared. "I need you to promise me something," she said softly. "Anything. Promise me you won't try to fix this. Don't buy your way back into my life. Don't use your influence to force situations where we have to see each other. Let me go cleanly, with whatever dignity I have left." The request felt like a death sentence. "Amara. Promise me, David. If you ever loved me, promise me you'll let me walk away." David looked into her eyes and saw not just pain, but a fierce determination to protect her daughter and herself. The same strength that had first drawn him to her was now pushing him away. "I promise," he whispered. Amara nodded, then reached up and kissed his cheek, soft, brief, final. "Take care of Tyler," she said. "Help him understand that sometimes adults make hard choices because they love their children more than they love themselves." She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty park. David stood frozen, watching her figure disappear into the darkness, feeling like his heart was being torn from his chest for the second time in his life. But this time, there was no illness to blame, no cruel twist of fate. This time, love itself had proved insufficient against the weight of an unforgiving world. Underscore 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 underscore. 3 blocks away, Amara finally allowed herself to collapse on a bus stop bench, sobbing into her hands as the full weight of what she'd just done crashed over her. She'd given up the first chance at happiness she'd had in years, walked away from a man who loved her and a future that could have been beautiful. But as she thought about Zoe sleeping peacefully at home, unaware that her mother had just sacrificed everything to protect her future, Amara knew she'd made the only choice she could live with. Even if it killed her. 6 weeks later. The auditorium at PS 147 buzzed with the excited energy of parents, teachers, and children gathering for the annual Spring Science Fair. Handmade displays lined the walls, showcasing projects on everything from volcano eruptions to plant growth, each one representing weeks of after-school research and weekend experiments. Amara stood near the back of the room, smoothing down her best dress, a navy blue sheath she'd found at a consignment shop, and checking her watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. She'd managed to swap shifts at her new job at a downtown cafe to be here, taking the financial hit because missing Zoe's moment wasn't an option. The past 6 weeks had been the hardest of her life. The new job paid less and offered no benefits, but at least the manager didn't care about gossip blogs or society photographs. She'd thrown herself into her studies with renewed intensity, using academic success as armor against the ache in her chest that seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker with each passing day. Zoe had asked about Tyler and the butterfly daddy exactly 47 times in the first 2 weeks. Now she only mentioned them occasionally, usually when she saw a butterfly or heard someone humming. Children, Amara had learned, were more resilient than adults when it came to accepting that some people simply disappeared from their lives. Mama. Zoe's voice cut through the auditorium noise as she bounced over, her gap-toothed grin radiant with excitement. She wore her favorite yellow dress, the one that made her look like sunshine, and her hair was adorned with butterfly clips Amara had found at the dollar store. "Hi, baby girl," Amara said, kneeling to Zoe's level. "Are you ready for your big presentation?" "I'm ready. Mrs. Patterson said I did the best research in the whole second grade. Come see my display." Zoe grabbed Amara's hand and tugged her through the crowd toward a corner table decorated with cotton ball clouds and paper butterflies. The centerpiece was a large poster board titled The Magic of Metamorphosis, in Zoe's careful 7-year-old handwriting. "Tell me about it," Amara said, her heart swelling with pride at her daughter's enthusiasm. "Okay, so butterflies start as eggs," Zoe began, pointing to the first section of her display. "Then they become caterpillars and eat lots and lots of leaves. But here's the really cool part. When they go into their chrysalis, they don't just grow wings. They completely dissolve. Like, they turn into soup." Amara laughed, despite herself. "Soup. Butterfly soup. And then their whole body rebuilds itself into something totally different. Mrs. Patterson says it's called imagine cells. That's the parts that know how to become a butterfly even when everything else melts away." The scientific explanation, delivered with Zoe's innocent wonder, hit Amara like a revelation. Sometimes you had to dissolve completely before you could become what you were meant to be. "That's incredible, sweetheart. You worked so hard on this." "I had help with some of the big words," Zoe said proudly. "And I learned that monarch butterflies can fly all the way to Mexico even though they've never been there before. They just know where to go because it's in their hearts." Before Amara could respond, a familiar small voice cut through the auditorium noise. "Zoe? Zoe." Both mother and daughter turned to see Tyler Sterling pushing through the crowd, his face lit up with pure joy. He wore khakis and a button-down shirt, but his hair was slightly mussed and his cheeks were flushed with excitement. "Tyler!" Zoe squealed, abandoning her science display to throw her arms around her friend. Amara's heart stopped. She looked up to see David standing 20 feet away, frozen in the middle of the crowded auditorium like a man who just realized he'd made a terrible mistake. Their eyes met across the space, and Amara felt every carefully constructed defense crumble. He looked thinner, more tired, but his eyes held the same warmth that had undone her 6 weeks ago. The same love that had made walking away the hardest thing she'd ever done. "Daddy said we couldn't come," Tyler was explaining to Zoe, "but then I told him about the butterflies and how they have to be brave to become beautiful, and him said maybe being brave was more important than being scared." David moved closer, his steps hesitant but determined. "Hello, Amara," he said quietly. "David." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Tyler saw the flyer on Mrs. Rodriguez's door when we went to drop off some books for you. He asked if we could support Zoe and I." David paused, his eyes searching her face. "I promised I'd let you go. I didn't promise I wouldn't show up when my son's friend needed support." It was a distinction that would have been laughable if it weren't so David, finding the exact loophole that would let him honor the letter of his promise while following his heart. "Look at my butterfly project." Zoe was already dragging Tyler toward her display, chattering excitedly about metamorphosis and imagined cells and the magic of complete transformation. Amara and David followed, maintaining careful distance but unable to look away from each other. "She's grown," David observed, watching Zoe explain her research with animated gestures. "Children do that," Amara replied, then immediately regretted the sharpness in her tone. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't be here. But Tyler." David's voice trailed off as he watched his son hang on Zoe's every word, more animated than he'd been in weeks. "He's been asking about her every day. About you. How is he?" The question escaped before Amara could stop herself. "Surviving like all of us, I suppose." David's smile was sad. He told me yesterday that he thinks butterflies and children are similar because they both know how to be happy even when the world is confusing. Despite everything, Amara felt her lips curve upward. That sounds like something he'd say. They stood in awkward silence, watching their children reconnect as if no time had passed at all. Tyler was helping Zoe arrange her butterfly specimens, and Zoe was showing him how to identify different species by their wing patterns. And this one, Zoe was saying, pointing to a large orange and black butterfly, this is a monarch. They're the bravest ones because they fly thousands of miles to find where they belong. How do they know where to go? Tyler asked. Their hearts tell them, Zoe said with 7-year-old certainty. Even when they've never been there before, they just know. The children's conversation seemed to echo around the auditorium, and Amara felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe Zoe was right. Maybe sometimes you just knew where you belonged, even when logic and fear and all the voices of caution said it was impossible. Amara, David's voice was hesitant, I need to tell you something. She looked at him, noting the way he was gripping his hands together, the nervous energy that reminded her of Tyler when he was working up courage to try something new. I dissolved the foundation board, he said quietly. What? Margaret, Harold, all of them. I disbanded the existing board and restructured everything. The Sterling Foundation is now run by education professionals, special needs advocates, and parents like us who understand what children really need. Amara stared at him, processing the implications. David, that's your life's work. Charlotte's legacy. No, he said firmly. Helping children is Charlotte's legacy. And I can't do that surrounded by people who think love is a liability and compassion is weakness. What about your business? Your reputation? David's laugh was rueful. Turns out losing a few society friends aren't the end of the world. The people who matter stuck around. The ones who didn't, well, Tyler was right about something else too. What's that? He said that sometimes people leave because they're not supposed to be in your story anymore. They're just making room for the people who are. Before Amara could respond, Tyler appeared at David's elbow, tugging on his father's jacket. Daddy, Zoe says butterflies mate for life. Is that true? David and Amara looked at each other over the children's heads, both remembering Tyler's tendency to ask the most profound questions at the most loaded moments. Not all butterflies, David said carefully, but some do. They find their mate and stay together through all their migrations. Even when it's hard. Zoe piped up. Especially when it's hard, Amara found herself saying. Because that's when they need each other most. The auditorium lights dimmed slightly, and the principal's voice came over the intercom asking parents to take their seats for the presentation ceremony. I should go, David said, but he made no move to leave. You came all this way, Amara replied. Zoe would be disappointed if you didn't see her present. It was a small concession, but David's face lit up like she'd offered him the world. They found seats in the back row, Tyler between them, chattering excitedly about all the projects he wanted to see. When Zoe's name was called, she walked to the front of the auditorium with confidence that made Amara's chest swell with pride. My project is about butterflies, Zoe began, her young voice carrying clearly through the microphone. I learned that butterflies are really brave. They have to let their whole old self disappear before they can become who they're supposed to be. She paused, looking out at the audience until she found Amara and David in the back row. My mama says that sometimes grown-ups have to be like butterflies too. They have to be brave enough to change, even when change is scary. Even when other people don't understand. Amara felt tears prick her eyes. When had her 7-year-old become so wise? The best part about butterflies, Zoe continued, is that they don't change alone. They find other butterflies who understand their journey, and they help each other fly to beautiful places. She looked directly at Tyler in the audience. My friend Tyler taught me that butterflies aren't just pretty, they're brave. And being brave means you don't give up on the people you love, even when the world gets loud and scary. The auditorium erupted in applause, but Amara barely heard it. She was staring at her daughter, this incredible little person who had somehow understood truths that adults spent lifetimes learning. As Zoe returned to her seat, she stopped at their row. Did I do well, Mama? You did perfect, baby girl, Amara whispered, pulling Zoe into her arms. Mr. David, Zoe said, turning to face him solemnly, thank you for coming. Tyler missed me, but I missed him too. Butterflies aren't supposed to be separated. David knelt to Zoe's level, his voice thick with emotion. You're absolutely right. And you know what? I think grown-ups sometimes forget that lesson. He looked up at Amara, his eyes holding a question and a hope that made her breath catch. Mama, Zoe said suddenly, can Tyler and Mr. David come to our butterfly garden tomorrow? I want to show them the chrysalis I found. It was such a simple request, delivered with such innocent expectation, that Amara felt the last of her carefully constructed walls crumble. I think, she said slowly, looking into David's eyes, that would be perfect. The next morning found them in Prospect Park's butterfly garden, watching Tyler and Zoe race between flower beds in search of monarchs and swallowtails. The children's laughter echoed through the morning air, a soundtrack of pure joy that made the adults' previous weeks of heartache seem like a distant nightmare. I've been thinking about what Zoe said, David said as they walked behind the children. About butterflies helping each other fly to beautiful places. She's pretty wise for 7, Amara replied, her heart still guarded but warming despite her best efforts. I think she gets that from her mother. David stopped walking, turning to face Amara directly. I have something to show you. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a news article dated 3 days earlier. The headline read, Sterling Foundation announces revolutionary partnership with Columbia University Special Education Program. Amara's eyes widened as she scanned the article. David, this is your thesis research, he finished. I cited it extensively in our new program proposal. With your permission, of course, and with full academic credit. The foundation wants to fund a pilot program based on your trauma-informed classroom design. I don't understand. David's smile was nervous but determined. I'm offering you a job, Amara. Not as my girlfriend, not as Tyler's honorary mother, but as the professional you are. Director of Special Needs Educational Innovation. Your salary would be triple what you were making at the restaurant, with full benefits and support to finish your doctorate. Amara stared at him, her mind reeling. You're offering me my dream job. I'm offering you what you earned through your own brilliance and hard work. The foundation board, the new one, made up of actual educators, reviewed your research blind. They didn't know you were the woman I'd fallen in love with. They just knew your ideas could change thousands of children's lives. David. I know what you're thinking, he said quickly. That this is me trying to buy my way back into your life. But it's not. Whether you take this job or not, whether you give us another chance or not, those are completely separate decisions. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an official-looking document. This is a binding contract offer that's valid regardless of our personal relationship. You could take the job and never speak to me outside of professional meetings. You could reject the job and I'd still spend every day hoping you'd give us another chance. They're not connected, Amara. Your career success doesn't depend on my feelings, and my feelings don't depend on your career choices. Amara took the contract with trembling hands, scanning the terms that would change everything for her and Zoe. Financial security, professional recognition, the chance to help children like Tyler on a scale she'd never imagined possible. This is real, she whispered. As real as the fact that I love you, as real as the fact that Tyler needs you and Zoe in his life. As real as the fact that some butterflies are meant to migrate together. Amara looked up from the contract to find David watching her with an expression of vulnerable hope. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I, he replied. But Tyler told me something yesterday that I think applies here. What's that? He said that butterflies can't see their own wings, but they trust that they're beautiful enough to fly. David stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. Maybe we can't see how this ends, but we can trust that what we have is strong enough to carry us. From across the garden, Tyler's voice rang out, Daddy. Miss Amara. Come quick. Zoe found a butterfly coming out of its chrysalis. They hurried over to where the children knelt beside a bush, watching in awed silence as a monarch butterfly slowly emerged from its transformation, its wings wet and delicate in the morning sun. Look, Zoe whispered, it's taking its first flight. The butterfly tested its new wings tentatively, then caught a breeze and soared upward, dancing through the sunlight with grace and purpose. It knows where it's going, Tyler said softly. Even though it's never flown before, it knows. Amara watched the butterfly disappear into the blue sky, and then looked at the three people who had somehow become her heart. Tyler, beaming as he pointed out other butterflies to Zoe. Zoe, chattering excitedly about metamorphosis and migration patterns. David, watching her with patient love and the promise of a future that seemed impossible and inevitable at the same time. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." David's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the hope blazing in his eyes. Okay to the job. Okay to trying again. Okay to trusting that some butterflies are meant to fly together, even when they can't see the destination. David's smile was radiant, transformative. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, Amara stepped forward and kissed him, soft, sure, and full of the promise of new beginnings. The children's cheers rang out across the butterfly garden as two families became one, united by love and the courage to transform them into something beautiful. 1 year later, the Sterling Foundation's inaugural Metamorphosis Gala filled the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel with educators, families, and advocates celebrating the success of programs that had helped over 3,000 children in their first year. Amara stood at the podium in a dress that Zoe had declared pretty as butterfly wings, addressing an audience that included teachers, parents, and specialists from across the country. "Children with special needs don't need us to fix them," she said, her voice carrying confidently through the ballroom. "They need us to see them, to understand them, and to create environments where their unique gifts can flourish." In the audience, David watched his wife with pride that made his chest ache. Yes, wife. They'd married 6 months ago in a small ceremony in the same butterfly garden where they'd found their way back to each other. Beside him, Tyler and Zoe sat in matching formal wear, Tyler's hand protectively over his new sister's as she practiced the breathing techniques that helped her manage crowded spaces. They'd adapted beautifully to being siblings, teaching each other coping strategies and sharing a bedroom decorated with butterfly mobiles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. "The most important thing we've learned," Amara continued, "is that transformation isn't about becoming someone different. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be, supported by people who see your potential even when you can't see it yourself." She found David's eyes in the audience, and her smile was radiant with love and accomplishment earned through her own merit. After the presentation, as the ballroom filled with celebration and the promise of expanded programs, Tyler tugged on David's jacket. "Daddy, can I tell you a secret?" "Always, buddy." Tyler leaned close, his 8-year-old voice full of wonder. "I think Mama Charlotte sent us the butterfly lady just like I dreamed. Because now we're all butterflies together, and butterflies take care of each other forever." David looked across the room at Amara, who was kneeling beside Zoe as the little girl presented a handmade card to one of the foundation's donors. His heart was so full it felt like it might burst. "I think you're right," he whispered to Tyler. "I think she sent us exactly what we needed to learn how to fly." As the evening wound down and their blended family prepared to go home together, David reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy. There were still challenges, still moments when the outside world questioned their unlikely love story. But they'd learned something that all the doubters couldn't understand. Real love didn't see barriers. It saw possibilities. It saw the imagined cells that could rebuild broken hearts into something stronger and more beautiful than before. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, love taught you to spread your wings and soar together toward destinations you'd never dreamed possible. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I'm sure you enjoyed it, didn't you? We have plenty more beautiful and interesting stories waiting for you. So go ahead, click the image on your screen and enjoy the next one. Like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories like this.